Keller, and on behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room, our series of virtual programs. We're pleased tonight to host Julia Phillips to discuss her best-selling book, Disappearing Earth. Disappearing Earth was published in 23 languages and was a finalist for the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Awards John Leonard Prize for Best First Book. It was one of the New York Times 10 Best Books of 2019. The Washington Post, Vanity Fair, NPR, USA Today, Esquire, and more also named it a Best Book of 2019. Congratulations, Julia. Julia is a Fulbright Fellow. She's written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, and the Paris Review. She lives in Brooklyn. Disappearing Earth was just published as a paperback last week. It can be purchased from the bookstall and mailed to your home. To purchase a copy, you can visit thebookstall.com. We'll conclude tonight's program with a brief question and answer session. You can enter your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. The chat box isn't accessible now, but it will be towards the end of the event. Please note that tonight's program will be recorded and may be shared on the library's social media accounts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Julia Phillips. Julia?
Hi, thanks, Beth, and hi, everybody who is part of this webinar. What a joy it is to be here with you together in this very strange shelter-in-place age. It feels really nice to be together virtually if we can't be together physically. Now, I hope you'll bear with me. I'm going to share my screen with you so I can show you some pictures while we are together. So just hang tight for a second. Okay, so hopefully that is working. And hopefully you can still see me. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for, taking a moment to come out this evening, or come in this evening, I guess, stay in this evening by your computer and talk together with me and chat together, which we'll do in a few minutes, about my debut novel, Disappearing Earth. Definitely to be here with you talking about the book means everything to me. It's the dream of my life. And getting to be together, even through Zoom, it means everything. It makes that dream come true. So when I talk about this book, I say that it's my debut novel, but the truth is that my first novel actually came out 24 years ago, thanks to a public library. So you all saw a sneak peek of this picture, but here is a clipping of me. I'm on the far right in a very 1995 outfit, holding the first book I ever wrote. And you can see the caption here probably, but it says, December 7th, 1995, participants in the Write Your Own Book workshops display their efforts, the results of a recent 4-week program sponsored by the Montclair Public Library's Youth Services Department. So there's me, all the way on the right, long hair then, and there's my first book, which was a murder mystery about a dead body found inside a snowman. It was frozen all winter inside a snowman. So it was a whodunit with violence and snow. And as we keep talking about Disappearing Earth, you'll see that though it took me more than 2 decades to publish the next novel, Disappearing Earth really doesn't stray far from this source material at all. I show this because growing up, I always wanted to be a novelist. I spent my childhood in suburban New Jersey in a place that looks very, very different from the place where Disappearing Earth is set, which is a volcanic peninsula in Russia. And as a kid, where I was felt so far away from where I wanted to be. And I spent a lot of time feeling stuck, to be honest. I wasn't a particularly grateful or present young person. I was pretty mad a lot of the time. But thankfully, my town had this library, this incredible library that had programs like this. And that space held portals to thousands of different places in the world. It had Alice Munro's Canada, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Colombia, Louise Erdrich's North Dakota, Toni Morrison's Michigan and Ohio. And those books opened all of our minds and our hearts to infinite possibilities, and they filled us with hope. So getting to be here with you now via Zoom, I feel that hope again. I feel that hope of connection, that the library persists in programming for us, even when we can't all be in the same place. It's incredible. And to consider the shelves and the titles that it offers every, gosh, I don't know if you can all hear, but it's quite noisy outside my apartment windows, and I hope where you are it's all a little quieter. So when I think about what the library offers, when I think about its shelves of books, every one of which is packed with possibilities, and when I think about the community that it cultivates, all of you who, in the midst of your busy lives, in the midst of these very destabilizing and stressful times, and your own concerns and needs and obligations and worries, you signed up tonight to be with other readers and writers. It's an incredibly generous act. And your presence here strengthens my faith in community and in connection and in the good that we can offer each other. It makes me feel the opposite of the stuck I felt as a kid, or the stressed I think we all feel in these coronavirus times. It makes me feel like we're going someplace better together. And I think the library does that for us always, no matter what historical moment we're in. It dedicates itself to presenting books and holding these events and offering every day to anyone who accesses it 1,000 new ways to see the world, which is not easy work, but libraries do it. They teach little kids to dream big. They encourage us all to tell our wildest snowman murder mysteries. So I hope that we'll keep showing up for this place and taking out books, ebooks right now, and donating in support of a place that means so much to so many. And I hope we'll spend tonight sustaining our hope in each other and celebrating everything that a story can do. So tonight in particular, I want to talk with you about how one specific book, my novel, my second novel, my debut novel came to be. I'm going to show you some pictures and read just a few pages, about 5 minutes from Disappearing Earth, and then we'll have a conversation together. And I'm crossing my fingers that you'll have some questions to ask me, because writing can be a very lonely process, but this here now, I hope will be anything but. I hope we'll all feel lifted out of our solo apartments or homes or wherever we are and connected to each other, because we're here to have a dialogue. And I'm really excited to hear your thoughts. I've been waiting a long time to hear them. I started working on Disappearing Earth a decade ago. Growing up, I dreamed of writing books, but I also had this interest in Russia. In high school, the way some of my friends got into music and they would go to concerts and shows on the weekends, I got very into learning Cyrillic, and I tried to convince our Ukrainian chemistry teacher to lead a language club to teach us Russian. In college, I majored in English so I could study creative writing, and I minored in Russian so I could spend a semester in Moscow. And in 2009, I thought, okay, the best way to combine these two interests is going to be to set a novel in Russia. And then I can move to the country, research the project, and scratch all my intellectual itches at once. Now, for years, I had heard the word Kamchatka as a figure of speech. If folks here, are Risk players, you might be very familiar, or Soviet military history buffs, you might be very familiar with it. But the way that I knew Kamchatka was that if you sat in the last row of Russian class, the professor would say, what are you doing all the way out there in Kamchatka? So the back row of the room, that was Kamchatka. It was far away from the center of things. So how far are we talking exactly? If you look at this map, Moscow is on, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving. I hope you can. But Moscow is this star here on the left side, the capital city. It's Russia's capital, and above it is, right at the border of Finland, that's St. Petersburg. It's the country's other most famous city. So those are 425 miles apart. And that's the distance from Washington, D.C. to Boston. And Kamchatka is all the way on the right here. It's this peninsula floating in the North Pacific. It's 4,200 miles to the east of Moscow. That's about the distance from DC to Berlin in Germany. It's very, very far away. Kamchatka is a peninsula, as you can see. So Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is what's written here. That's the capital city of the peninsula. The whole region is the size of California, and it just juts out into the Bering Strait. So I have a map here so you can kind of orient it in space. So you can see that the tail of Alaska swings out and it swings into Kamchatka. No roads connect Kamchatka to the Russian mainland, so it's only accessible to us by air or by sea. And until 1991, it wouldn't have been accessible to Americans at all because it was a Soviet military base where no foreigners were permitted. These days, Kamchatka is very open to visitors, but still extremely hard to access. It's a spot for adventure tourism. It's on the Pacific Ring of Fire, so it's filled with volcanoes and geysers and seismic activity. It is much more than the farthest seat in a room. It's the spectacular edge of the world. So my plan was set, write a book on Kamchatka. I spent 2 years applying for funding to go there. And in 2011, I got really lucky and a fellowship came through. Finally getting to see the peninsula in person absolutely stunned me. My first day there, I went to the main city center, which is a plaza with a shipyard on your right. I took a picture of it. Here's the shipyard. And a big hill on your left, which you can just see on the very left of this picture. And a bay open in front of you. And way out on the opposite shores are the tiny lights of a nuclear submarine facility. They're the lights of a part of the peninsula that's still a closed military region, still where no foreigners can go. And above that facility are mountains that are so huge and distant that they look flat. They look like rows of cut paper, dark blue, light, all the way up. Here's a picture of me. I'm 23 in this picture, I think, and I'm so happy here. I'd never been in a place like that before. Look how thrilled I am. You know, I grew up in New Jersey, right? So visiting Chicago is absolutely enough beauty to blow my mind. Still, every single time I go, I fall over. It's so gorgeous. The landscape of this volcanic peninsula was impossible for me to fathom. But again, I was lucky. People at the university, at the public library, in outdoor clubs started offering to show me around. And meeting that many strangers that quickly created its own challenges because I was in a totally new context. And in this context, I didn't know what was hospitality and what was predation. Only a couple of weeks into my time on Kamchatka, this one guy kind of fixated on me. He was 20 years older than me, married. He worked at a warehouse at the city's port, and he was incredibly nice to me in a way that felt too nice to me. He called me every day. He brought food over to the apartment. He showed up everywhere I went. In New York, I would have a certain reaction to this. But in Kamchatka, I don't know how to react to what I'm experiencing. And one evening, this guy says, let me drive you around so you can see the sights. And I say, sure. He picks me up from my apartment after sunset. He ends up parking at the city center at that same gorgeous place I'd gone to the first day. We walk down to this beautiful bay, and he says, come on. And he walks to the left on a path that goes behind that big hill. And I follow. There's the sheer face of the hill on one side of us and the flat water on the other. And the path is rocky, and it's getting narrower. The plaza isn't visible at all behind us anymore, and there's no one else around, and it's dark. I'm walking behind him, looking at his back, and I thought, I'm about to get hurt. I'm about to get hurt. He did not murder me. Lucky. In fact, after a minute, we sat down on those rocks. He sat down, and the nuclear lights were twinkling across the water, and he was like, seen any good movies lately? And I could hardly breathe. I'd been so scared, and the idea that he was just asking me about movies, I couldn't even process. But the evening truly turned out to be absolutely benign, and later that guy became one of my best friends on Kamchatka. I have a picture of him here during a walk we took around the city months later. All that enthusiasm, all that kindness was really enthusiasm and kindness. He was really excited to have a new person to show the peninsula to. But I will never forget that walk down that path, because it was this narrow line between safety and horror. The perception of exactly how vulnerable you are. The person you're with is bigger, stronger, a local, a citizen, well-connected, in control. If he chooses to hurt you, what do you do? What can you do? How, under this threat, will you live? These are some of my favorite pictures. And some of my favorite pictures from Kamchatka that I took were moments that I was scared. Because we've all walked that line. I think walking that line is the experience of women in a patriarchy, the poor in a society obsessed with wealth, indigenous communities in a colonized country, and those made outsiders in a nationalist state. It's a Russian experience, certainly, and it is a profoundly American one. It is an international experience of being at risk and of knowing that at any moment things can go wrong. This book, Disappearing Earth, is rooted in such a moment. So I'm just going to read you the first few pages of the book. Here's how the book opens. This is the first time I'm reading from the paperback, by the way. Yeah, sandals off, was standing at the water's edge. The bay snuck up to swallow her toes. Gray salt water over bright skin. Don't go out any farther, Alyona said. The water receded. Alyona could see under her sister's feet the pebbles breaking the curves of Sophia's arches, the sweep of grit left by little waves. Sophia bent to roll up her pant legs, and her ponytail flipped over the top of her head. Her calves showed flaking streaks of blood from scratched mosquito bites. Alyona knew from the firm line of her sister's spine that Sophia was refusing to listen. You better not, Alyona said. Sophia stood to face the water. It was calm, barely touched by ripples that made the bay look like a sheet of hammered tin. The current got stronger as it pulled into the Pacific, leaving Russia behind for open ocean. But here it was domesticated. It belonged to them. Hands propped on narrow hips, Sophia surveyed it, the width of the bay, the mountains on the horizon, the white lights of the military installation on the opposite shore. The gravel under the sisters was made of chips from bigger stones. Alyona leaned against a block the size of a hiking backpack, and a meter behind her was the crumbling cliff face of St. Nicholas Hill. Water on one side, rock wall on the other. They had walked along the coast this afternoon until they found this patch, free of bottles or feathers, to settle. When seagulls landed nearby, Alyona chased them away with a wave of her arm. The whole summer had been cool, drizzly, but this August afternoon was warm enough to wear short sleeves. Sophia took a step out, and her heel went under. Alyona sat up. Soph, I said no. Her sister backed up. A gull flew over. Why do you have to be such a brat? I'm not. You are. You always are. No, Sophia said, turning around. Her tipped-up eyes, thin lips, sharp jaw, even the point of her nose annoyed Alyona. At 8 years old, Sophia still looked 6. Alyona, 3 years older, was short for her age, but Sophia was tiny all over, from waist to wrists, and sometimes acted like a kindergartner. She kept a row of stuffed animals at the foot of her bed, played pretend that she was a world-famous ballerina, couldn't fall asleep at night if she caught even one scene of a horror movie on the TV. Their mother indulged her. Being born second had given Sophia the privilege of staying a baby all her life. Gaze fixed on a spot on the cliff far above Alyona's head, Sophia lifted one foot out of the water, pointed wet toes, and raised her arms to fifth position. She tipped and caught herself. Alyona shifted her seat on the stones. Their mother always tried to get Alyona to take her sister along to classmates' apartments, but these little misdeeds were exactly why she would not. Instead, they had spent their summer vacation alone with each other. While Sophia balanced, Alyona looked along the shore. A man was picking his way over the rocks. "Someone's coming," Alyona said. Her sister splashed one leg down and lifted the other. Sophia might not care who saw her act like an idiot, but Alyona, her forced companion, did. "Stop," Alyona said, more loudly, heating up in her mouth. "Stop!" Sophia stopped. So you all know the story behind this story now, and you can hear the ways that fact has been made into fiction. There are so many differences between what happened in my life and what these characters are experiencing on the page. In real life, of course, I was not Russian or 11 or 8 years old or hanging out during my summer vacation. I wasn't lying in the sun or playing in the water. I don't even have a sister, but what is the same, what is shared between these sisters in fiction and my life and all of our lives, I really believe, is that path. Alyona and Sophia are going to meet the man who's on the shoreline with them. And they're going to follow him like I followed my friend. In this fictional world, the man has sprained his ankle on the rocks on the path, and the girls help him to his car. He offers them a ride home, and they accept. So I'm just going to read a very short excerpt, one page, from the book when they're in the car with him, about that car ride. From the passenger seat, Alyona took the man's features apart. A wide nose and a mouth underneath that matched. Short brown eyelashes, round chin. His body looked carved out of fresh butter. He was too heavy, probably. That must be why he slipped clumsily on the shore. "You have a girlfriend?" asked Sophia. He laughed and shifted gears, accelerating up the hill. The car hummed underneath them. The bay drew away behind. "No, I don't." "And you're not married?" "Nope." He lifted his hand, fingers spread to show. Sophia said, "I saw already." "Clever thing," he said. "How old are you?" 8. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "And you're also not married, am I right?" Sophia giggled. Alyona turned to watch the road. His car was taller than their mother's sedan. She could look down on roof racks and along the pink lines of drivers' arms. People were sunburned after this one day of good weather. "Can I put the window down?" she asked. "I prefer the air conditioning. Straight through this intersection?" "Yes, please." The trees along the sidewalks were fat and green from this rainy summer. They passed ragged billboards on their left and concrete paneled apartment buildings on their right. "Here," Alyona said. "Here. Oh," she twisted in her seat. "You missed the turn." "You missed the turn," Sophia said from the back. "I want to take you to my place first," the man said. "I need a little more help." So you can hear they are in the moment when things go wrong, and Alyona and Sophia's luck has turned. I'm going to try again to share the screen with you so I can show you a ballerina I met while I was there. Here we go. This girl I met in Kamchatka is a little bit younger than Alyona is in the story, but I like to think of her when I thought of Alyona doing her ballet moves. Disappearing Earth is about how these two young sisters go missing and what impact that has on the people around them. Every chapter that follows this first one moves us forward 1 month from their disappearance. Because that's what happens. We see them in the car, and that's where the chapter ends, with them in the car driving. The next chapter, they're disappeared, they're lost. And every chapter that goes on focuses on a different character somehow connected to this crime. Over the course of a year on Kamchatka, we come to know the detective on their case, the witness to their abduction, the mother who is waiting for them to come home. We also meet people who are much more distantly related to them, people who maybe have never met them, and yet whose lives shaped what happened to them that day and what happened afterwards. Every one of these characters, no matter how closely or distantly related, grapples with their own power or powerlessness, their fear, their fury, their complicity, and their desire to regain control. And where their individual experiences come together is where we find the clues to solve the sisters' mystery. And I really want to emphasize that. I always want to emphasize that. It's so important for me to say that those clues are there, because this this novel is about violence and loss, but it's also about finding answers. It's about these dreadful paths that we walk, but also the connections that can surprise us at the path's end. The risk is enormous, and the danger is real. And yet there's someone may hurt us, but community can save us. And we can come together to save ourselves. I hope that search for connections resonates with you. And I believe it might, because this is that why we're here right now. We show up to something like this to connect to each other. We're seeking community, seeking answers, seeking relief. We don't want to be alone. We're searching together for ways to move forward. And we come here together to help. I put on here some of my favorite pictures from Not Scary Times. This is I loved this little girl that I met. And this is another very happy kid. I don't know if you can guess why she's smiling, but I'll tell you, it's because she is making a snowman, and none of us know what she might have hidden in there, or what she might imagine she has hidden in there. But really what you are all doing here now, tonight, connecting to each other and to this beautiful library and to this text, is exactly why I and all those other kids were in that Write Your Own Book library program 24 years ago, 25 now. It's why I went to Kamchatka, and it's why this novel exists. It is a dream come true to get to share that with you, to get to experience together chasing this. Hugely grateful. And speaking of seeking answers, yes, Beth is spot on. Shall we open up our conversation? Does anyone have questions to begin a Q&A, or can we chat together?
Yes, Julia, thank you for that really interesting presentation. That first part of the book that you read, I found so suspenseful. So it was great to hear you read it. I also want to encourage everybody to enter your questions in the chat box, and then we can pose them to Julia. She'll be happy to answer them. While we're doing this, I want to remind everyone that the paperback book, the paperback issue was published just last week. And again, it can be purchased from the bookstall in Winnetka. Julia's holding it up. I love the cover. The books are available for sale at the bookstall. And if you log on to their website, thebookstall.com, or if you can copy this long link, that will take you directly to the book. Otherwise, just go to thebookstall.com. You can order a book online, and they will mail it to your home for delivery. So that's awesome, and we thank our friends at the bookstall for doing that. So let's see if we have any questions.
Well, I'm seeing them in this cool Q&A function. How fabulous.
Okay, Karen asks if you're working on a new book now.
I am working on a new book generally. I did not work on it today, and I did not work on it yesterday, but I'm hopeful that I will be working on it tomorrow. It's a book that explores a lot of the same themes about violence and about gender and community, but in ways that are new and really challenging for me, and I'm so excited to keep going deeper and deeper. And luckily, it's set in a place that is doesn't take me 3 years to save up money to get to. So I'm excited. Hopefully, the research process will be a little smoother because of that.
Let's see, from Howard, he wants to know why the title of the book is called Disappearing Earth. Why is the book titled Disappearing Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. So in between the two sections that I read, the sisters on the beach, Alyona, the older one, tells Sophia, her younger sister, kind of urban legend, a scary story about a tsunami that hit Kamchatka in the 50s and washed away an entire town. really was a tsunami that hit Kamchatka, I believe, in 1952, that did an enormous amount of damage. But in her telling, it is huge, and it's 150 feet tall, and it washes away a whole village, and it really makes this whole chunk of earth disappear. And right after that, the girls go from experimenting with fear and telling this scary experience, kind of telling this myth, into living the fear of being swept away by something they can't control. That tsunami story turns very frighteningly real for them very fast. I wanted the whole book to speak to that story, the feeling of being on unsteady ground, and the feeling of not knowing what you might lose next, or not being able to stop something that happens to you, and so having to navigate that. It's a quite poetic title that I actually anticipated would change in the publishing process, but it hung on it. We never found a better fit than
that. Let's see. Amber asked, tell us about your writing process, please.
So in an ideal world, my writing process is that I'm writing every day. For me, an hour of writing new material is quite a lot. I find drafting to be very difficult, the first draft to be quite hard. And then revising is very joyful for me. So I would love, and I do love, to spend maybe like 4 to 8 hours in revisions if I have the time. And that is a perfect day for me. I haven't had one of those perfect days for a while, but I'm working on kind of developing the muscle and the discipline to get back into that schedule. It's very
fun. Okay, we have more questions. Let's see. Anne says, I want to read this. Part of the reason is, I think, that you were actually there. Was that imperative to you as a writer? Could you have written the book without having lived there?
I think other people can write books without being in the place. There's an incredible book called Bill Chung called Southern Cross the Dog that is set in Mississippi, and he is born and raised in Queens and had never been to Mississippi at the time that he wrote the book, and he really embeds his characters and his narrative there. He's extraordinarily skilled. For me, I needed to be there to write about it, and that was really crucial for me, to see all that I could see, and to learn all I could learn, and to have the lived experience of understanding what I was not perceiving and what I had kind of inability to learn, or where my blocks were. That was hugely helpful to me, and an extraordinary opportunity to get to do. I'm so grateful for that grant that sent me there that first year that I was there.
Okay, lots more questions. Let's see. Marla asked, we were wondering if you believe
Oh, now this is a little bit of a spoiler. So I wonder if,
should I
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Beth, but it's
yeah. So should we, well, I think the next question sort of goes hand in hand. I'm gonna just read, I can read the question. I can read Marla's question. What do you think? Should I read it? Everyone can see it probably, so.
I can see it. I wonder if.
And she said, P.S. Love the book.
Guys, don't look at the don't look at the chat. But I could talk about the ending for hours for sure.
Okay, because Marla was wondering, about the girls, and then Judy asked if you can address the ending. My book club had various feelings about what happened to the girls, although everyone wants to have a hope of rescue and reunion with their mothers. And okay, so those two questions are about the ending, and I don't know if, I'll turn it over to you, Julia.
Yes, so the ending is what I talk about with folks most who have read the book, and it is, and everyone has a different. Judy, your experience of like your book clubs having various feelings about what happens to the girls in the whole book is very consistent with what I've learned. I don't want to say too much. Okay, so it looks like people can't see the questions, so good. No one can see them. We're letting the library media support is telling us that we're safe from spoilers in the chat. In hesitation of, okay, I won't tell the ending. In hesitation of saying too much, I don't want to spoil it, but I do want to say that for me, it is generally very, I'm a reader whose taste is toward getting an answer. When I read a book and it has a question in the beginning, I want to know what happens by the end. And it's hard for me as a reader to sit with a book that is more open-ended or totally open-ended in that way. And so when I wrote the ending, I intended it to be the answer to the question of like, what has happened here? We're following a year in an investigation, and I want the investigation to give us some result at the end. And the result, to me, my understanding of that result in the end is a little bit different. I've learned from what other readers' understanding of the end is. But my hope is that it makes people feel like they got the answer they were looking for, or like they understand how the clues come together. Is that, I hope that is general enough not to be spoilery, but still specific enough to speak to what people are asking. You can also email me.
Sounds good. And if people want to ask more questions to dig deeper, we'll see how time goes. Yes. But I know there's other people here who say, Anne says, don't tell the ending.
Absolutely.
Okay. Marcia says, do you think there is any space for feminism there? I assume she means in Russia?
Yeah, I mean, Russia,
peninsula?
So Kamchatka and Russia and are an extraordinarily interesting place. Russia in general and the Soviet Union are really an extraordinary place to look at what feminism has and women's rights have looked like, certainly over the last century, more than a century now. Russia was, or the Soviet Union was very much predicated on equal rights for everybody, but gender certainly, like very, very progressive in terms of its initial constitution being like extremely, women had the vote there before it was one of the first countries in the world to give women the vote. It was one of the first countries to have legalized abortion, no-fault divorce. A huge part of the Soviet Union was like mandatory childcare. Mandatory, it sounds like but communal childcare. And even a lot of the setups around communal living, like communal apartments, were designed to, there's a lot of kind of slogans and propaganda around this that's really fascinating, but like take the yoke of labor, household labor, off of specifically women's backs. It's a really, really fascinating place to study in terms of better understanding, from my American perspective, how women's rights have moved or not moved here, and in the US, that is, and what kind of effect a sort of top-down approach can have in national leadership, saying we are mandating women's rights, and what kind of effect that doesn't have. Contemporary Russia is in a different place, certainly, than the Soviet Union was in a million different ways. I mean, later Soviet Union was in a different place than the early Soviet Union was. Like, things change. And certainly contemporary Russia and contemporary US are very, very different places, but they're fascinating to look at and think about what, for me, like some of the things that I thought or think that equality for women look like are in place in Russia, and some of the things that I thought equality would look like are expressed in Russia or talked about in Russia in very different ways through experience of having tried those things and decided not to do them anymore, which is fascinating because here in the US, that is not my experience at all, that we've tried those things and have decided not to do them anymore. It's very interesting to me. We can move on to the next question, but it's very interesting to me.
Okay. We have a few more questions. Yes, thanks. Why such an interest from Susan? Why such an interest in Russia at a young age?
What a wonderful pivot from a question from the feminism topic, which is that I had a crush on a Russian American camp counselor when I was 12 years old at summer camp. Very embarrassing, very, very embarrassing. I totally lost touch with that person immediately, which was wonderful. But after that, I was just at a very influenceable age. I was, at that sort of like pre-teen moment where anything that comes in like becomes foundational. And Russian language really got its hooks in me. I was really fascinated by Russian language. I started reading a lot of Russian literature, and it was extraordinary. I always wanted to be a writer, so to read that literature blew me away. And learning more about Russian history taught me a lot about the country that I was born and raised in. And it made me see that a lot of the America I knew was created in opposition to or in relationship to Russia. And so I just wanted to know more and more and more.
Along similar lines, can a person who doesn't speak Russia visit Kamchatka? And that is from Eileen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's a big tourist infrastructure there. So when I went there, I studied Russian for 6 years by the time I went there for the first time. I was not fluent. I was advanced, I would say. So like a confident Russian speaker at the time, did all my conversations in Russian, but certainly there are lots of vocabulary words and nuances of the language that I don't know. I found it very helpful to speak Russian there, but the tourist infrastructure, the infrastructure for outside visitors now is robust and really fundamental to Kamchatka's current economy. There are so many folk, there are translators working there, there are tour guides, there are so many different things you can see and places you can go, speaking only English, for example, and you'll have lots of eager English speakers to talk with you. The person who I tell that story about, who I walked on that path in the Bay with, a big reason for his enthusiasm is that he's a fantastic English speaker, a fluent English speaker, and he wanted someone to practice English with.
Emma asks, would love to hear Julia talk a bit about writing the New Year's party or how she managed out all the character connections and deciding which one's path would cross. Thank you.
So I always wish that the answer to the charting out connections sounded more sort of like high literary and artistic. The truth is that it involved a lot of kind of conspiracy theory pushpin boards with strings that connected from one person to the next, and it was very it didn't feel like high art. It felt like obsession, and that was a very, very fun thing for me to do. The big help for me in organizing character connections and organizing the whole book, which has like a huge, as it sounds like you know very well, like a very big cast of characters and a lot of different places that were going at different moments of time, was a word processing program called Scrivener that is really, it's a very, very wonderful tool for creating a book-length writing work or any kind of complicated piece of writing where you can have notes and character names and lists and labels. You can have all your research in one place, and it's all displayed to you at the same time that you are working on the actual text. And I found that to be invaluable. If I had done the whole thing in Microsoft Word or something, I don't know how I would have been able to keep anything in my head. So that program, Scrivener, kept it all together for me.
Thank you. Let's see. I want to make sure we get to as many questions as we can. Let's see. more questions about, did you speak Russian and did you communicate in Russian or English? But I think you've already answered that. Hallie says, thank you for your diplomatic answers about the ending. Interesting book, really enjoyed it and appreciate you speaking and sharing with us. Judy asks, follow up, this is a most masterfully constructed novel. Love the intersections between characters and continuance of issues and themes. FYI, I grew up in a household that played risk with seriousness and competition. I was thrilled to see a book invoke Kamchatka as a character. I still have the game in my closet and hope to play it again soon. Not the same with only 2 of us in the house. Debbie says, given your fascination with Russia, I am wondering if you watch the TV series The Americans. If so, what are your thoughts about it?
So I was so excited. The Americans, I understand, is extraordinarily wonderful. In my household, we started watching it. So my partner and I met through studying Russian and we're very excited. The Americans was so, for me, so intense and so suspenseful and so exciting that I actually couldn't bear to keep watching it, because every single episode was like the most high stakes thriller movie that I'd ever watched. And it was the time that we watch TV is like after dinner when we're winding down. And I couldn't, like, my heart was pounding. I couldn't go to sleep afterwards because it was so exciting and good. So it's on my pop culture bucket list to watch all of The Americans, hopefully at a time when I can have a little more like ability to hold its wonderful tension and skill. For some reason I didn't have that at the time we tried.
Let's see, Julia, do you have time for a couple more questions? Or
yeah, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure, I'm just trying to make sure we get to everybody. I think 2 different Marlas asked questions about the ending, so I know we don't want to give too much away, but there was one of the Marlas said, P.S. love the book, so wanted to pass that along. And then, let's see. Could Julia explain, from Karen, could Julia explain Russian names and how Russian nicknames are formed?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my many favorite things about the Russian language. The Russian language is incredibly beautiful and has so many different particularities. And one is in naming really, really lovely, like different conventions around, I say different, meaning different from how I grew up or in a non-Russian speaking household, around names and nicknames especially. So in Russian, your first name is your first name and your second name is your patronymic, which is is formed out of your father's first name. So my name is Julia, or in Russian, Yulia, and my father's name is Peter. So I would be Yulia Petrovna. And my brother's name is also Peter, which is funny, and he would be Peter Petrovich. So both of our patronymics, both of our middle names would be formed out of our father's name. So Yulia Petrovna is like, when I was on Kamchatka, I taught an English, I led an English language club at the library, and the students who would come, like the 14-year-old students who would come in, and the first time they met me, they would call me Yulia Petrovna. Like that was like, it's a quite formal way to address somebody. It's a very respectful way to address someone. You would, instead of calling me like Mrs. Phillips or something, or Ms. Phillips, they would call me by my name and patronymic. But you would call your boss that, you would call an official that, someone that you don't know, someone that you're first meeting, like in a respectful relationship. In a social relationship or casual relationship, if I was being introduced to someone who is a friend or going to be a friend, or kind of in a peer group, they might call me Yulia, like, my first name, but not address me by my full name at all. When you're affectionate with somebody, you use their nickname, and the world of Russian nicknames is extraordinary and robust. And there are a lot of characters in my book who go by their nicknames in the context in which, so we're seeing them like at home or with their friends or with their partner or their family, and they're called by their nickname, which is like a sort of, it's a diminutive. It's like a tender shortening of their first name. There's a chapter, for example, that focuses on a girl named Xusha, which is short for her full name, Ksenia. And I wanted to address her only by her nickname in the text because she's quite young, and people don't treat her with a lot of respect, I would say. And everyone sort of addresses her by this cutesy name all the time, or this like tender, but a little bit affectionate, but certainly not, no one is like respectfully saying like, excuse me, Ksenia, can you blah, 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 blah. Everyone's calling her by her nickname all the time. Those shades of formality and casualness were fascinating to me, and there's something that I wanted to explore with the book a lot. It was a lot of fun for me to think about who these characters were and how they were called by different people around them.
Okay, there's still a couple more questions. Should we wrap it up? Do like one more question, two more questions?
Yeah, do you want to do two more?
Okay, great. This one might be a shorter one. Your favorite Russian novel from Anne?
My favorite Russian novel is Anna Karenina. I love that book. It blows me away every time. There is a big Tolstoy Dostoevsky, as a Russian student, there was like a big Tolstoy Dostoevsky kind of like virtue signaling thing where people who liked Tolstoy were a certain kind of person and people who liked Dostoevsky were a certain kind of person. And the suggestion at the time was like, oh, if you like Tolstoy, or you're just like reading romance novels of the Russian Golden Age. I love romance novels. I love Anna Karenina. I love, like, it sweeps me away. I love the plot. I love the grandeur. I love the characters. It is stunning. I think it's one of the great achievements of world literature, of anything that's ever been written. I just think it's extraordinary.
Great, thank you for that answer. And then Anna asks, and we'll make this our last question, please comment on your experience with native tribes.
So Kamchatka is like all of Russia, is a colonized region. It's been colonized by ethnic Russians, who are the people who in American media we're most often presented with the idea of as Russian, Slavic people, Eurasian peoples, who to my American eyes present as white, and they've got blue eyes and blonde hair, and this is kind of this image of Russianness that we're given. But Russia is a continent. It's enormous and enormously diverse in terms of peoples and histories and ethnicities and experiences. And Kamchatka, because it is so far from kind of Western Europe, where the Slavs were moving out of over centuries, it is one of the last regions to be colonized. It started being colonized by Europeans in kind of 1600s, 1700s. But that doesn't mean that no people were living there. Like, people had been living there for over 10,000 years. So there are indigenous Kamchatkans, there are indigenous Siberians who are now living in Kamchatka, who moved there like in the 1800s. And that's still a robust, about, I believe it's almost 10% now of folks living on Kamchatka are indigenous Kamchatkans or Siberians, indigenous Russians. And there are characters in the book who are indigenous, and their ethnicity and race shapes a lot of how they are perceived or taken seriously by authorities, who are, most of the authority is concentrated in the hands of ethnic Russians on Kamchatka. And that dynamic is really interesting to me as someone who is from also a colonized country where there is an ethnic group in which most power is concentrated, and has created policies in order to concentrate that power. very interested in that dynamic and in better understanding that dynamic. So getting to be on Kamchatka and learn about its history and therefore better learn about my history was really extraordinary. I spent some time traveling around the peninsula, and in one particularly meaningful and incredible experience, getting to spend a lot of time with a group of reindeer herders. Reindeer herding and reindeer husbandry is a way of life on Kamchatka that goes back many thousands of years. And getting to spend some time with people who are living and working in that context was one of the most interesting experiences of my whole life, and hugely generous on the part of the people who took me in and fed me and showed me how a reindeer is lassoed. It was a really, really great experience, and a bit of that is in the book. There are some reindeer herding scenes because it was so unforgettable to me.
Thank you. And as maybe as a way of finishing up, Emma says that this was my favorite novel that she read last year. So a few people, Julia, let's see, I know that it's almost 8 o'clock, which is 9 o'clock your time. A few people wanted to know if they can hear more about the ending, if others want to log out, but I realize that it's late in New York already.
Yeah, no, maybe we can give it like 5 minutes if other people want to log out, and then we can talk about the ending.
Okay, that's so generous of you to share your time. Thanks.
That's okay with everybody.
Thank you all. So I just wanted to, before we ask those who want to leave if they don't want the ending spoiled, just to thank you, Julia, for your time and your sharing your stories and your wonderful words about libraries, and to thank our attendees for joining us for Library in Your Living Room, and to please check our website at hplibrary.org for other virtual programs for our Library in Your Living Room series.